So today, I was originally going to rant a little bit about how Apple is doing well, but also trying to segregate their markets too much between the what amounts to be an amazing iPad Air and the upcoming M1 chips in their Mac Minis, etc., etc. But that's conveniently something, and I'm sure everyone will believe me when I say that absolutely no events has caused me to change the subject to lying. Dirty lies, straight lies, happy lies, all of those things. So, what kind of lies are there really in society? Let's think about that for a moment, right? Why do we lie? We lie for a variety of purposes, whether that is to gain an advantage, which is, of course, the most common form of lying, or to, well, what else? If we think about it, at the end of the day, we lie because we want to gain an advantage. An advantage over what? Over whom? There's no reason to lie if we don't gain something out of it. And so it's very interesting for us to then explore some of the reasons why we might lie and what we do gain from it. For example, the classical gaining material benefits, right? We lie about our economic situation, and the government compensates us by giving us extra money. We lie about economic situations to our friends or strangers, and they give us money so that we can buy more pretty and happy things. All very, very natural and very much, at least to me, a part of what makes humans human. Because if we think about it, I personally subscribe to this theory of evolution that exists. And given that we are still only about, let's say, 10,000 years out from being hunter-gatherers, our entire species is geared towards gaining short-term advantages over planning for the long term. That's just how we survived as a species less than 10,000 years ago. And so the question becomes then, as we become more and more literate, as our society evolves, have we really changed from that? I would argue no. I would argue that, in fact, evolution has slowed down as our societies have improved. And there is good reason to celebrate that, because now senseless deaths can be avoided. But that is interesting, right? What is a senseless death? Are we essentially, does this mean that the us that exists today, in terms of the physical characteristics, in terms of what our lower nervous systems desire, is that the same as what we were 10,000 years ago when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were evolved to be very efficient hunter-gatherers? And the answer is yes. Yes, we are exactly the same. So we desire short-term gains, and unless we really, really focus on them, we tend to disregard long-term rewards. And I mean, I'm not even going to bring examples, because if you can't figure it out, well, that's your problem. And so why do we lie? Back to that topic. We lie because we want short-term gains. And the classical for value, gaining value lie can be explained very, very simply. But there are other reasons why we lie. as we evolve, as we become more literal and more understanding, and as our love and affection grows, we lie to make those around us, make someone who's important to us feel better. It could be a friend who has just, let's say, failed an audition, and we say, "Oh no, you were great. Those judges must be stupid to not see how great you were," when in fact he was actually sounding like a drowned cat. I mean, these things happen, and we lie in that moment to make that person feel better because we think that that's how that person that will give that person a temporary reprieve from their recent suckiness. We lie, perhaps, because we want our parents to be proud of us. Perhaps we've done something that we know they don't approve of, and yet we continue to do so. And so we tell them that we haven't done it, just so that they are happier not knowing. Now, in both these cases, I would actually argue, personally, that is not necessary. I would say this. Towards me, they are not necessary because I would rather the truth. I value the truth. There are some people who can't handle the truth, and so you deal with them in a different way. But personally, I think the truth the truth is a beautiful thing. And once it's no longer taken for granted, once that ground truth is taken away from us, things quickly lose their foundations. And before I give examples of that, I'm sure there are plenty in this current world. I just want to emphasize that part of what makes the truth so beautiful to me, even if it's painful, is that it is something that we all share, or that we all acknowledge. And so by living in the same world, we all have the same types of anchors and the same types of, shall we say, events that we can all hold on to, and therefore we're not lost. Like, the reality that I perceive, if we share the same truths, would be the same as the reality that you perceive, and that's beautiful. If my reality, my foundations are shaken because the truths that I perceive are not the same as the truth you do, then suddenly that society becomes too many examples just came into my head. So suddenly that society becomes fractured, and not only that society, but the spirit of that society, and the collective consciousness of that society is fractured. And when that happens, that society becomes difficult to, or I should say, mending that society is much more difficult than mending a society where ground truths are observed by all parties. And if we think about it, it makes a certain amount of sense that, these two types of lies start merging together. So I'm talking about the value-based lies, but also the good-natured lies. And as we make more and more good-natured lies, our own ability to discern the truth and the ground truth, the facts that happened, not the facts, I shouldn't say that, the observable events that have happened changes in our minds, right? Because the mind is so infinitely malleable, we are able to convince ourselves of these changes. And so, sorry, got off topic again. When the lies that bring us value and the lies that we make in good nature merge, then that society becomes almost impossible to synchronize. You cannot if it's impossible to agree on any ground truths because everybody is so used to lying to each other, then that entire society has lost its foundations, has lost its heart, has lost its collective consciousness. And as a society, collective consciousness is the only thing that holds the fabric of that society together. And now we get on to some examples of the modern age. The first example is actually not what most listeners would imagine I would use, but actually stems from the old Soviet government. And so Soviet Russia, of course. And it's this idea that as the party gains power, as the party gains power and needs to demonstrate its effectiveness, the overall data that the party puts out to both itself and the rest of the world becomes politicized, or became politicized, past tense. and when that happens, if both the party and the population and the rest of the world do not believe in this data, then that society has already had a fundamental shift where that consciousness has split between those whose livelihood and whose career prospects, let's say, depend on believing that data, and those who don't. So interestingly enough, if we look at late Soviet era discussions, propaganda, etc., we start seeing that very thing where what the party says has nothing at all to do with what is happening on the ground, with what the general population believes. And so it becomes almost impossible for those two separate consciousness, for those two separate strata, let's not say strata, for those two separate segments of society to reconcile, because they are talking past each other. And so, of course, then you have the riots that essentially fractured the USSR, and our boy Mikhail decided, there was nothing he could do to hold on to the Soviet states, and dissolve the entire thing. And so, that society fractured, and we, even today, in 2020, 30 years later, we're dealing with the aftermath of a society that had grown up to not have a ground truth, that could not trust not just official, but that could not trust those who are in position of power. Similarly, we can look at certain nativist. Oh, we're already at 15 minutes. Oops. We can look at certain nativist, not nativist. What am I saying? I'm actually going to talk about the way that management and the unions worked in the British automotive industry in the 1970s. And so, interesting, right? Because the two groups, the unions and management, could not understand each other. They really, both of them had the same goal, which was to keep making cars, to keep profiting, to at least make some profit, and keep those jobs alive, and retain sort of Britain's power as a manufacturing and blah 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 blah. So why did that not happen? Why was it that there was no way for those two segments of society to really reconcile their differences? And I would argue that's because they have completely different ideas of what their personal ground truth or their personal truth is, that has nothing to do anymore with the ground truth. So again, just a quick reminder, throughout this I've been using the term ground truth, I think, as the nature of events as observed by a completely neutral, 100% logical third-party observer. So back to BL, British Leyland, and so with management and the workforce being completely blind and deaf to each other's needs, and having built up years and years and years of animosity. And we have to remember that animosity is not something that happened after World War II, right? It's Britain was the first to industrialize, and the first to see the benefits of industrialization completely favor one class. So that animosity does not come from a few years, but it was because the fabric of that society, the very consciousness of that society, had separated into, or I shouldn't use the word separated, I should use a firmer word, had split, had been torn apart by years and years and years of people who saw the world differently. Whether it was for pure greed, or it was because they thought they knew better, doesn't matter. It matters. It doesn't matter anymore. It's because there were lies, and there were not just, of course, that there were lies, but because there was value at stake, that these two societies, that entire social consciousness split so irreparably. And so, of course, 100 years later, BL just completely made a faff of everything. And if we argue, or I would actually argue, that both world wars had only delayed that split in consciousness from creating that very, very how do you say, very firm tearing of society. If World War I and World War II never happened, then that society would have been torn apart on its own much sooner. And in fact, of course, that's something that our boy Karl of Marx fame really very much advocated. But oh my god, we're at 20 minutes. Okay, so we'll leave it here for today. Really, the thought remains: lying, whether it's for value or whether you just you think you're helping someone you love, it's just not good. No.